Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, on the program, we will be talking about depleted uranium, something we talked about before. Tonight, we will have another expert, Rokke, who the United States Army sent to the Gulf back in after the 1990 war in the Gulf to clean up the depleted uranium. And when he came back, he had a different story to tell. But we will see when we get him on. Before we go to Rokke, though, to Doug, there's a couple of things I need to get out of the way. One of them, I will be in Washington State and Idaho this weekend. I was invited to speak at a college over there. Want to know about what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in this country, as a matter of fact. People who have been watching the show from all over the country, they know that we speak a different language here from Fox and CNN. So people want to know the truth. So I will be in Washington State and in Idaho. I'll be speaking at the America's Promise Ministries in Sandpoint, Idaho, and then in Spokane College. Mark Foley, the congressman, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on him. I'm sure you have heard a lot about it on CNN and Fox, etc., etc. But the only thing I want to mention about Mark Foley, ladies and gentlemen, is I want to give you some statistics. And the Christian Coalition gave him 84% on his ratings. That's when he was running for election. The Christian Action Network gave him 77% rating. Concerned Women for America gave him 92% rating. Campaign for Working Families, 90%. This is a man, I'm not going to go in details because you have heard all the details, but this is the type of democracy, ladies and gentlemen, that we have now. It is not a representative republic, or is it? Do these people in Congress represent America? Well, they're supposed to, because they're supposed to be a representative republic. If our congressmen, the people that we elect to protect us and protect our children, when they become the predators, there's a problem. There's a problem in the country. I'm not going to blame Mark Foley. I'm going to blame whoever elected Mark Foley and whoever is still electing this type of people to represent them. That's the type of government that we have now. If this is how a representative government is, then, hey, let it be. That is a reflection of who we are in this country. If we are putting these people in Washington to represent us, then they reflect us. And don't tell me that people did not know who Mark Foley is. In 2001, the class, of course, you know, pages. A lot of people don't know what a page is. A page is a congressional staffer, normally a 16, 17-year-old, to basically take messages and send messages. They work in congressional offices. They're messengers. They do just little stuff here and there. That's what a page is. So in the class of 2002 page, they had actually warned them about Mark Foley. They said, stay away from Mark Foley. But yet, they continued. And even they were having, back in 2002, they were having actually like a get-together for pages, and Representative John Shimkus, Republican of Illinois, he was like in charge of the pages at that time, and he even let Mark Foley speak. And Mark Foley, when he spoke, he said, he got up in front of the pages, and he told a special little story of how he took one mail page to a private dinner in downtown Washington, D.C., put the page in his BMW and cruised, Foley's words, to dinner. And now, listen to this. Foley told the kid he had to get permission from his mom, and he had to notify the clerk of the House. Jeff Trandall, the Republican staffer who works for Republican Speaker of the House, Denny Hastert, you will also recall that Trandall is the clerk who joined Shimkus in 2005 to talk to Foley about the creepy email exchange with the first child who got this scandal started. So we do have this man who, you see, when you're dealing with 16-year-olds, you cannot just take somebody into a private dinner. Especially, you don't let a 16-year-old go with this congressman, especially after you had warned the class of 2001, 2002 to stay away from this guy. And yet, we still send our kids with him. So, again, don't blame Foley, blame who sent him over there. Because that's the kind of republic we have. It is a representative republic, and it reflects on who we are and who we became or have become in this country. Okay, what about this habeas corpus that now the law is the government does not have to show a cause when they arrest someone? They can just come to your house, arrest you, and you can't do anything about it. No one can do anything about it. They can have you indefinitely, and they don't even have to charge you. Is this America, ladies and gentlemen? Where have you been? What have you been doing? How could they pass, how could Congress, this representative of yours, how could it pass a law such that law? Ladies and gentlemen, if you heard of the Soviet Union, or if you knew what communism was, this is it. Totalitarian regimes, this is it. Dictatorships, this is it. Right now, if they don't like what you are saying, they can come to your house and arrest you. And there's nothing you can do about it. A friend of mine sent me an email. A friend who has been on the forefront fighting for 9/11. Sent me an email yesterday saying, hey, what are you going to do? Are you going to continue with the show once Bush signs it? Well, I told him, yes, absolutely. But I will be saying, long live the emperor. Because that's what we're going to have. That's the kind of government we will have here. Believe it or not, this is happening in America. They have passed a law that the government does not have to show a cause to arrest you. They don't have to do, and they can take you indefinitely without even charging you. If they don't like what you're saying, if they don't like what you say on about them, if they don't like you, just go pick them up and send them somewhere. And hey, they don't need to show anybody anything. Now, of course, I'm assuming we still have one step to go. I'm assuming that the Supreme Court will do something about it. But, you know, thinking that this is the same Supreme Court that had elected George Bush, then I really doubt if they are going to be able to do anything about it. You might say, well, I'm not worried about it. The majority of people, they're not involved in politics. Exactly. And the majority of people, they're not going to be arrested. It's only the activists. It's only those people who are speaking out. In any country, you think the Soviet Union had everybody in jail? No. And this friend of mine who called me and asked me if I was going to continue with the show, and I told him, yes, absolutely, I will. And, well, he wrote me back and he said that he's really thinking seriously about leaving the truth movement about 9/11, because he said he had elderly parents that he cannot afford to go to jail, and he needs to take care of them. And I respect that. I think everybody needs to, everybody knows his limit of sacrifice. Everybody knows that. You know, some people they're not willing to sacrifice anything. Some people, as long as they are sitting on their couch with their beer, flipping through the channels, hey, that's all they want. That's all they need. Some people take it a little further. We will continue bringing you the truth as long as we can. Now, if they come over here and they say, look, you know, it's against the law, or if they pick me up, then, you know, then I guess I won't be speaking to you. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is the country we live in now. It is the law that they don't need to show a cause to pick you up and arrest you. They'll just say national security, and that will be it. And also remember, you know, the enemy combatant stuff. They can throw that charge at anyone. It's definitely a problem. It's definitely a problem. Well, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we will be speaking with Doug Rokke. I wonder if we have him on.
Yeah, good evening.
Doug, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great, great. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
Doug, let me just introduce you to my audience, our viewers. Doug Rokke is... Let me just read something that he had written in another interview, or he was quoted in another interview. He said, it's lonely. He says slowly. It's very lonely. I made a decision. I was given a job. I did my job. I learned something. I gave them an answer they did not want. I became a persona non grata, and the better parts of my life ended. What remains is an obsession with proving he is right about the dangers of depleted uranium weapons. A waste produced from uranium enrichment process, depleted uranium, has become increasingly contagious since American and British militaries first used it in the 1991 Gulf War, and since then in the Balkans, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Rokke, a healthy scientist who became the Pentagon's most senior depleted uranium expert during the first Gulf War, became convinced it had contaminated the battlefield and could be a factor in Gulf War syndrome, the mysterious mix of illnesses that have afflicted returning soldiers. Rokke acknowledges depleted uranium's brilliance as a weapon because it is an extremely dense metal that sharpens and burns as it hits its target. It is used on the ends of tank shells and missiles to penetrate steel and concrete much more easily than conventional weapons. But he also believes that he and the research team became contaminated. Everybody's sick, he says. We have all got rashes, respiratory and kidney problems. It is there. There are no two ways about it. Doug, tell our viewers, now we did have a couple of people here who spoke about depleted uranium, but tell our viewers what depleted uranium is.
Yes, I'd be glad to. Depleted uranium is a munition used by the U.S. military and by the British military, the Australian and Canadians. It's available in Russia. Pakistanis also sell it. So, again, then anybody that gets weapon systems from the United States, England, or Canada will obviously have it. Excuse me. Depleted uranium is actually made, as you mentioned, it's a byproduct of the uranium enrichment process, whereby we extract fissionable isotopes of uranium, that's uranium-234 and 235, to make nuclear weapons and to make nuclear reactor fuel. For every 100 pounds of uranium that goes in, you got over 99 pounds of uranium-238. We actually have 99.2 pounds uranium-238, 0.7 pounds uranium-235, and 0.1 pounds uranium-234. What happens at Oak Ridge, Kentucky, Paducah, or in Oak Ridge in Tennessee, Paducah, Kentucky, and Portsmouth in Ohio, that's the Bernal plant, is they extract about 0.6 pounds for every 100 pounds that goes in. And that 0.6 pounds is a mixture of uranium-234 and 235. So for every 100 pounds that goes in, over 99 pounds is pure waste. That's primarily uranium-238, and then what happens is the military uses that and remanufactures it and processes it into make what's called depleted uranium munitions. There's different types. We have the kinetic energy penetrator, and that's a gigantic solid rod of uranium. They're not coated, they are not tipped. The entire round is solid uranium. It is also contaminated with plutonium, neptunium, and americium, and uranium-236, which is a byproduct of nuclear reactors. And so, for example, the Abrams tank fires one single round where every single round is over 10 pounds of solid uranium. The Bradley fighting vehicle fires a round where every round is a half pound of solid uranium. The A-10 Warthog aircraft fires a round where every round is over 3/4 of a pound of solid uranium at a rate of 4,000 rounds per minute. It's a ton and a half of uranium on target per minute. So those are kinetic energy penetrators. Then we have the 20 millimeter. Then we also have for the machine gun bullets a 50 cal and a 7.62 millimeter. These are all what we call kinetic energy penetrators, or gigantic rods of uranium. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay, and in addition to that, what we have is we have the ADAM and the PDAM. That's ADAM and PDM. Now, these are cluster bombs, landmines, if you will. And what it is, the casing is made out of uranium, and they're filled with high explosive. They are the absolute perfect dirty bomb. And the U.S. has used those extensively during Gulf War I, in the Balkans, in Afghanistan, and then they gave them to Israel, and Israel just used them in Lebanon. Okay, so we have that. In addition, then we have all the bunker busters. These are gigantic bombs, again, mixture of high explosives and uranium casings. And these things work extraordinary. I mean, if you want the best weapon to use against any target, it doesn't matter whether it's armor, or it doesn't matter if it's a wooden apartment building or a house, a car or a truck, a sandbag bunker. Uranium munitions are absolutely incredible in their killing and destructive power.
So now you were sent to Kuwait, was it?
Well, during Gulf War I was sent over originally as an expert in nuclear and biological chemical warfare with the 12th Preventive Medicine and the AM team and the Theater Medical Command headquarters. So we formed what was called Bowers Raiders. We were the theater experts in nuclear, biological, chemical warfare, hazardous materials, emergency response, the whole thing. Basically a super public health department of trained professional experts from universities and hospitals. We were all reservists or National Guard. And with the completion of the ground war, they had used uranium munitions extensively, and all of a sudden dawned on them, nobody had figured out what to do with the mess. And so one day I got called over to the Commanding General's headquarters for the Medical Command, DG Zulis, and found out that Schwarzkopf had issued an order telling me to go clean up the mess. And it took us 3 months to clean up 24 vehicles. That's 15 Abrams tanks and 9 Bradley fighting vehicles. We buried a whole bunch in the desert. They were just totally trashed and destroyed, with the body parts and contamination and everything else. We couldn't do anything else with them. And then we came back, wrote all the reports. In 1992, we started the U.S. Army Environmental Policy Institute report on depleted uranium that was mandated by the United States Senate. And then consequently, I was reordered back to active duty as the director of the U.S. Army Depleted Uranium Project in 94 and 95, and we've been working on it ever since.
So you went there, you wrote your report, and they did not like it?
No, they didn't like it at all, because what we had saw during Gulf War I is the adverse health effects started within 24 to 48 hours. Not only all the casualties that still have never received the medical care, but on our team of experts that was tasked to clean up the mess. And then medical care was denied. I issued as a theater health physicist, I issued the medical care order to provide medical care to everybody right away with the completion of the ground war. The theater medical commander, we're talking about the #1 doctor for all of Gulf War I, issued the order in June of 1991. It has been reissued numerous times. In the most recent acknowledgement from the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, written by Dr. Mark Brown, who's in charge of environmental services, he acknowledged that only a little over 500 people have ever been tested for uranium exposure since in 15 years. And I turned in over 400 names personally. There's thousands and upon thousands more from Gulf War I, and thousands upon thousands from everything since then. And they just continuously refuse to comply with their own written orders mandating medical care. They simply refuse to clean up all the environmental contamination that they're required to do by U.S. Army regulations signed by General Eric Shinseki, who's the #1 general in the Army when it was issued.
Now, can you really clean up this depleted uranium? Not number one, before you answer that, depleted uranium, I mean, it's not really, I mean, the term is kind of confusing and actually gives the impression that depleted uranium is harmless uranium.
Well, it's not harmless at all. The term depleted is a scientific term, and what it refers to is that for every 100 pounds of this mixture that we have, that we remove 0.6 pounds of the fissionable isotopes. Now, we still left uranium-234 and 235 in there. We only removed a portion of it. So the term depleted refers to removing a fraction of the fissionable isotopes that are needed to make nuclear weapons and bombs.
So really there's nothing depleted about depleted uranium.
It's still very toxic, and you can't change or alter that.
Okay. Now, can you ever clean up this mess? I mean, is it possible?
Well, that's the problem, what we found out.
Hold on. You said that's the problem, what you found out. Are you telling me the Army did not do their own research before using these weapons?
The Army had not developed any procedures for the management or the cleanup or the medical care prior to the use of these during Gulf War I. The original use and everything that we've been able to verify is when the United States gave them to Israel, and they used them in 1973 and 74 in the Sinai against the Egyptians. And some of the early work was done on that, and the early report on the health and environmental effects is what I based my work on as the director of the Depleted Uranium Project for the U.S. Army. So they basically had nothing in place. And so as a consequence, with the completion of the ground war in February of 1991, they were freaking out. They didn't know what to do, and so I got tasked, and our team got tasked to clean it up. And it took us 3 months to just to collect, identify, secure, and prepare for transportation or bury a handful of vehicles. And that's just a handful of U.S.-destroyed Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles. So, no, they hadn't. Then from all of the work we did, starting the congressional reports, working with the United States General Accounting Office, and working with other people, working with the VA, and then the U.S. Army Environmental Policy Institute, we got the directive, came on down from commanding generals, we're talking about the 4 stars, to start the Depleted Uranium Project, and that's when I got recalled to active duty to do it again. And what we did then is we had multiple things. First off, I was tasked to do all the research to find out what the true hazards were, the extent of the hazard, what needs to be done, what personal protective equipment is needed, what training and education is needed, and then what procedures do you use to clean up the mess.
And in the meantime, while you guys are trying to figure this out, you yourself and your team got exposed to it.
Well, we got exposed right off the bat during 1991 when we went to clean it up, even though we were wearing the U.S. Army-issued respiratory and skin protection. And again, the same thing happened when we did the DU project, the Nevada test site in Mercury, Nevada. We wore both U.S. Army-issued equipment and U.S. Department of Energy-issued equipment, but it was useless. It just absolutely was thoroughly useless. And so that was part of what we found out, that respiratory, the so-called Army gas masks, are absolutely useless against this stuff because it's such a fine particulate, and we're talking about sub-micron in size. So HEPA filter masks and everything else just don't stop it. It goes right through. Okay. And so we had gross contamination. What happens when uranium munitions are used with a kinetic energy penetrator is you fire a round out of whatever your gun is, say the Abrams tank, and each round is over 10 pounds of solid uranium. As it flies through the air, it's on fire. And, okay, so it's shedding stuff all along. And then on impact, about anywhere from 40 to 70% of it breaks up into an extremely fine what we call uranium oxide or uranium fragments called spalling. And this dispersant contaminates the whole area and goes on, travels for miles and miles with the wind. And then once it settles down, it's resuspended and keeps doing it. So we found out a real mess. And then with the research we did in Nevada, I specifically developed procedures to minimize the adverse health and environmental effects by trying to mitigate or attempt to clean up the contamination, even though you can never really clean it up once you've dispersed it.
Now, you estimated that about 220,000 of our own servicemen are on disability and maybe due to this depleted uranium?
No, way far more than that. During Gulf War I, we had a whole bunch of different exposures, and that's something that everybody needs to understand, and that's what's called Gulf War illness. Never was a single event. There was all kinds of combinations of things that everybody was exposed to, because you can't separate one thing out in combat. You're exposed to everything. What we do know and what happened to us is we can isolate, based on all the medical research and everything we've known from, going back to the 1940s, is that uranium dust and all of this stuff causes very specific problems. You have the particulate irritation because it's so fine. It's like, going into a dust storm, getting all the dirt and dust in your mouth and your lungs and everything else, and eyes. Then we have the chemical toxicity. It's sort of like lead paint dust. Then you have the radiological toxicity from the alpha particles, the beta particles, the X-ray emissions, the rays, and also the gamma rays. And so you have all of these things affecting you. And it's just a complete, thorough, total mess.
Now, we did use this in the first Gulf War. We used it in Afghanistan. We used it in the Balkans and Bosnia. We used it. We are using it in Iraq. What is the effect on the local societies there, the local people there? What is the effect on them?
Well, first off, during Gulf War I, we used approximately 375 tons of solid uranium. Okay, in 94 and 95, we used approximately 30 to 35 tons in the Balkans. This is 94 and 1995. We were going to use it in Somalia in 93, okay, in 94, but I got that stopped. But we did get the medical order issued at that time in October of 1993, mandating medical care within 24 hours of exposure, which is totally ignored today, even though it's a Pentagon directive. And then when we came up to 1999, we tried to stop the use in Somalia. Myself and Denise Nichols and Dr. Rosalie Bertel, we had gone up to meet with Clinton's staff, Bill Clinton's staff, and that's Admiral Elmo Zumwalt, Colonel Mike Nalen, and Senator Warren Rudman. And obviously Department of Defense officials were there and Department of Energy. We tried to prevent its use in the Balkans in 99 unsuccessfully. And then obviously with Gulf War I being planned, and originally started for 2000 and then finally starting, later on. We used it extensively in Afghanistan and continue to do so. We've used it extensively in Iraq, during Gulf War II and that whole region, and continue to do so. And then we've provided it to Israel, and they use it in Lebanon this summer.
Okay. I did have on the show, I had Lauren Morit, who you and her had done some work together, probably on like speaking tours, and I think you have your articles were collected in a book. Also, I had Dr. Mohammed Meraki, who spoke about what is happening in Afghanistan with the population there, and also Lauren Morit had spoken of what's going on in Iraq, that the people over there, they don't ask, is it a boy or a girl on a newborn? They just want to know if it's normal or if it's deformed. And she did say, Lauren Moritz said that it's almost impossible to clean up this mess that we have done there, and it's going to take hundreds of years or even thousands of years before we can even clean this.
Virtually you can't clean it up. The procedures that we developed and validated for the U.S. Army, which are published in their Army regulations and procedural manuals, okay, technical manuals, that they're absolutely required to comply with, but they refuse to do so. What we learned, and this is what we learned from firsthand experience. First, number one, you have to go there and remove all the unexploded ordnance, which is extremely hazardous. Because ordnance explosives can partially burn, but they won't blow up, and all you got to do is basically hold your tongue wrong or breathe wrong, and they blow up in your face. That's how 3 of my guys died during Gulf War I, trying to clean up a DU tank. And destroyed and contaminated tank, with munitions all unburned. And so what you have to do first off is somehow secure all of the unexploded ordnance. Then you have to secure all the hazardous materials. Then what you have to do is go in there and physically remove the destroyed vehicle, but in this case, entire apartment buildings and water treatment plants and factories and everything. It's just not an isolated, tank or truck or whatever. It's all kinds of things. Then once you get all that physically removed, you have to properly package it and dispose of it someplace. In the United States, we only have one site where they can actually dispose of them right now, and that's in Barnwell, South Carolina, the U.S. Department of Energy Savannah River site. They're processed at the Defense Consolidation Facility, and then after they're processed, buried. What's unique from Gulf War I is I sent 24 vehicles back, 15 Abrams tanks and 9 Bradley fighting vehicles. It took 3.5 years to process those 24 vehicles for disposal.
So what you're saying, it's impossible. You'll never be able to clean up this mess.
Yeah, and then once you've got all that picked up, then you have to take a bulldozer, and you have to physically go in and remove all of the dirt and soil down to at least 8 to 10 inches and dispose of that somehow. That's what we learned. And again, that's what I did when I did all this work during Gulf War I, and I validated when I did the research for the Army. When we did the research in Nevada test site, what I did is I literally burned up vehicles with uranium munitions, and then what I did is shot up all kinds of targets. So I would find out exactly what transpired when they were used. And from that is where I wrote the U.S. Army regulations mandating thorough environmental remediation and medical care, and then we developed all the procedural manuals from that also. And we also put together what's the U.S. Army Common Task Training on depleted uranium, which is every person in the U.S. military and the Army must master. They must know and be able to perform all components of that task before they're deployed. But guess what? It's not happening.
Okay. Doug, stay with me. We're going to take a break very quick, and we will be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are speaking with Doug Rokke. Doug, is this, we went after Saddam Hussein for having a weapon of mass destruction.
Which he didn't have.
Which he did not have, but we did. And we used it.
Correct.
We are supposed to be the head of the civilized world, and yet we go to a country that did not do us anything, and we use depleted uranium, which is basically a weapon of mass destruction, and their babies are going to be born deformed for probably thousands of years to come. Is this against international law? Is there anyone who's going to say, look, United States, you did wrong? Is anyone working on this deal to make it right? Can we ever make it right?
Well, the United Nations Subcommission on Human Rights, through the work of an incredible lawyer by the name of Karen Parker, who's from California, and then worked with on this issue. Yeah, they passed it years and years ago that uranium munitions were illegal. But again, it's just common sense. You have to understand, uranium munitions are solid, radioactive, chemically toxic materials. You could not even legally dispose of 1 pound of depleted uranium or uranium munitions at any place or any location within the United States or other civilized nations. That the United States has taken thousands upon thousands of tons and dispersed it throughout all over the world, and including in the United States, and literally refused to clean up the contamination that they're required to do by their own orders and regulations, and they refuse to provide the medical care that they are required to do by their own orders and regulations. The toxicity of uranium emissions is given. I mean, prior to Gulf War II, Colonel Edgar J. Wakayama briefed all the senior leadership of the Pentagon on uranium emissions. And I'm reading this briefing right now. It's very clear, quote, "The alpha particle taken inside the body in large doses is hazardous, producing cell damage and cancer. Lung cancer is well documented." It's exactly what we've seen. The beta particle is hazardous to the skin and the lens of the eye. That's where we had all of the rashes and the eye damage. And I had surgery earlier this year for specific all the eye damage. They finally fixed it after many, many years of problems. Colonel Wakayama went on, continued to brief the senior leadership, and this includes Secretary Rumsfeld and all the generals. That is, DU is chemically toxic. It's like eating lead. Target organ is a kidney in the bone. What it does is there's decalcification. So you not only have decalcification of the bone like osteopenia and osteoporosis, but then obviously your teeth are all decalcified. They just fall out and break off, which has happened to us. Urine samples containing uranium are mutagenic, as determined by the Ames test. The cultured human stem bone cell line with DU is also transformed the cells carcinogenic. There's all the leukemias. And then in addition, we have all of the other chemical toxicity effects the neurological system and everything else. It just goes on and on. The primary routes of exposure, again, inhalation, absorption, absorption. The one thing that they told the leadership at the Pentagon they were very concerned with, and this is, quote, ingestion. And this is from children playing and eating contaminated soil and contaminated drinking water and food in the community.
So, have you been speaking overseas? Like, are you doing any traveling?
Well, ever since I was the director of Depleted Uranium Project back in the 90s, and I did all the briefings within the Pentagon and within the military, once I found out and realized in 1997 that they were not going to comply with their own requirements and they were not going to provide medical care to anybody, then I started speaking out all over the country and all over the world. So yes, I have.
So how are people in the world look at the United States? Because I'm sure probably a lot of people in the world, especially in the Muslim world, know about depleted uranium, know exactly what happened, know who did it. But unfortunately, our own people here in the States, they are not familiar with what we are doing, what we have done with depleted uranium. How do other countries, I mean, what other people are telling you from other countries? Are they saying, why can't you people stop this madness? Tell me about the views of other people from outside America.
Well, I've been to many countries and speaking, with the United Nations and other governments and churches and peace groups and everybody all over the world. It's very clear. The fact that the United States Department of Defense military personnel deliberately and willfully spread thousands and thousands of tons of radioactive, toxic materials in the form of uranium emissions around the world, and they refuse to clean it up even though they're required to do so by their own written orders and regulations and directives. And they refuse to provide medical care not only to our own U.S. military but anybody else in the world. It's perceived as just absolutely unacceptable. And it truly is. It truly, truly is.
Now, you are not an outsider. You are a military man. You spent 35 years in the military, I believe, or...
Yeah, I came in the military in 1967.
Right, as a matter of fact...
And I'm still in. I'm on the retired disabled list.
I think you said you were bombing villages in Vietnam before you even learned how to shave.
That is correct. In 1967, at that time, I was a bomb nav hard hat on B-52s. That's maintain the avionics, and I was a bombing accuracy specialist on B-52s during the Vietnam War. And so I had 38 missions and, killed a lot using bombs out of B-52s, or was responsible for maintenance and operations of the system.
And you are a major in the Army Reserve now?
Pardon me?
You are a major in the Army Reserve?
Yeah, I've gone all through all the ranks. I was in junior enlisted. I was a non-commissioned officer. I became an officer, got a direct commission because of my expertise, and continued on up. And I probably would have got promoted and probably made full colonel or general if I hadn't made the choice to tell the truth and fight for reality and try to ensure that the U.S. Army Department of Defense complied with their own mandatory action requirements.
So you're not an enemy of the United States, are you?
Oh, no, I'm a flag-waving red, white, and blue retired military officer whose life and career has been dedicated to defending our nation and training and educating our troops and providing medical care to them.
So why are you speaking out since, I mean, you know, it's my country, you know, right or wrong? What happened to that?
Well, you can't have my country right or wrong. When your country's right, you're going to do everything you can. When it's wrong, you have an obligation to speak out. It's very simple. Nobody has the right to take thousands of tons of radioactive munitions, chemically toxic radioactive munitions, disperse those throughout the world, to include throughout the United States, not only in other areas, because we've dispersed them during manufacturing and testing, then here within the United States, much less combat, and then refuse to clean up the contamination that they're absolutely required to do by their own adopted regulations and orders, which have the same force as U.S. federal law or international law. And then they refuse to provide medical care. I mean, not a day goes by where I don't get a phone call or a knock on the door, get stopped on the street by somebody who was exposed or sick, whose medical care has been absolutely denied, who didn't receive the proper training and education, who was not given any of the protective equipment they need, and they've been thoroughly abandoned by our own nation's leaders. You know, you have an obligation as a patriot. You have an obligation as a military officer to ensure that things are done right. And when they're not, you have an obligation to speak out.
Now, don't you think that the Army's responsibility is to win wars under any cost?
Well, yeah, if you have a viable threat and you have a true enemy, yes, you need to eliminate that enemy. Okay? But you have an obligation to select the weapon systems that they use that are, you know, don't affect all of the world, men, women, children, animals, nature, air, water, and soil. And you have an obligation, once it's been done, to clean up the mess. You just don't go to war where you use technology that has a permanent effect on everybody, up and beyond the direct combatants for eternity.
Okay.
There are higher levels of moral obligations in the world. Now, don't get me wrong. If an enemy threatens my country and if I have to defend it, I'm going to be the first out there to do it. But if I shoot and wound the enemy and they still live, I'm going to provide medical care to them, and I have done that. And I will continue to do that, and I will ensure that it's done because it's required.
So you don't think you're betraying the country when you speak out against depleted uranium?
Oh, no, I'm the higher obligation. I'm not speaking out against defending our country. I'm speaking out against the refusals of the United States military to clean up the contamination once used and to provide the medical care, not only for the U.S. military, but for everybody, that they're required to do. You have to understand, when the leaders of our nation, the leaders of the military, thoroughly and completely disregard their own mandatory requirements, then you have an obligation to speak out.
Okay. Doug, I have seen pictures of babies who were born right here in this country for returning soldiers who were born without arms, and some of them were deformed. Do you have any information on those cases?
Yes, we've worked with many of those in the past. The most recent one we have is the 442nd New York Army National Guard Military Police Unit. And this was a group of New York police and firemen that have responded to 911 who got recalled to active duty, activated as National Guard military police, sent over to Iraq without any of the training or education. They were put into a contaminated area that had not been cleaned up, even though it was supposed to be. And then once they got exposed, they were not given any medical care. What happened in this case is several of them came back and conceived children during, the 1 week leave in the middle of their tours. and then afterwards, and the children were born with horrible birth defects. Their medical care was deliberately denied, and then once medical care was organized and provided to them, then the Department of Defense just simply walked away from them. Now, recently, because of this, they filed a lawsuit in U.S. federal court in the Southern District of New York. And the judge's decision is they have absolutely no hope or dream of getting any compensation, restitution, or medical care because of what's called the Ferris Doctrine, F-E-R-E-S, which goes back many, many years. And what it says is you can't sue the military or the government, no matter if they're negligent or whatever. You can only ask them. You're just completely without any luck or hope.
Okay. California, of course, Louisiana was the first state to actually require or offer uranium testing for returning soldiers, and last week California became, I think, I don't know how many states require that, but last week California became one. So people, I mean, and states, you know, for them to enact these laws, they do know it's a problem. Why you think the media, and by the way, we have like about 8 minutes left in the first hour, and we will continue speaking with Doug about this in the second hour, and we welcome your phone calls. I know we did not want to go to the phones while Doug was speaking because I really wanted him to explain this to us, but in the second hour, we will take your phone calls. Doug, the media, why isn't the media doing something about this?
Well, you have multiple problems. Number one, anytime we have a reporter that starts digging in and looks into the thing, they'll contact us. We'll provide them with all the information, unclassified reports and everything else. But then once they start writing, you have direct interference from the Department of Defense or from the White House, forcing them to stop. What has happened with university professors and scientists, they get direct threats. What's happened to all of us and other individuals, and it's continuously, I mean, I just wrote a letter to the head of another university because of a literal blatant attack on somebody that had been reporting on this, a university professor. And they'll do everything from physical attacks, psychological attacks, financial attacks, deliberate denials of medical care, any type of retaliation that they need to use to prevent anybody from knowing that there are orders and regulations absolutely mandating medical care and environmental cleanup and total thorough training and providing of all the respiratory and skin protection that they can do to prevent acknowledging it. This all goes back to, in March of 1991, General Franks and General Brown gave me a memorandum called Los Alamos Memorandum. And what this did, it ordered us to lie on a report to sustain the use of uranium munitions and avoid all liability for adverse health and environmental effects. It's astonishing.
Who's doing the threatening?
Department of Defense officials, Department of Energy, Department of Veterans Affairs. There's a whole group of them that's totally organized and coordinated. Last Friday, it's been happening for a long time, and the last attack on the most recent attack on university professors, I called the U.S. Army Inspector General's office in Washington, D.C. on Friday. And the colonel finally came on the line, and I spoke for a few minutes, and then he just hung up on me.
Wow.
They just won't even acknowledge it. They do know that the orders exist. They do know the regulations exist. They do understand, acknowledge, and know that they're being violated. But there's absolutely no accountability within the Department of Defense or within the White House. Members of Congress have attempted to get accountability numerous times. They called them on the carpet, and they just thumb their nose at Congress.
I mean, someone...
Bernard Sanders, Jim McDermott. I mean, they go on, just go on legendary. The numbers that have attempted to do something that have been, virtually ignored.
Now, you met with Congressman or Senator Kucinich.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of working with Dennis Kucinich when he was running for President of the United States. He's an incredible man. And it was most interesting because we had met out in Washington State. I'd gone out there and met with James McDermott, a congressman, and then also met with Dennis Kucinich to discuss all of this stuff. So he made a part of his presidential platform to make sure this was all taken care of. Incredible, incredible person. But then the Democratic National Committee, stopped all of this stuff cold at the convention. So, yes, we've worked there with everybody, continuously trying to work with different people. We briefed all kinds of congressmen and senators over many years. Denise Nichols and I, an Air Force major, a combat nurse who treated casualties at the front line, got exposed and is sick, and all of this stuff, and continues to fight for medical care for the veteran. The two of us were specifically tasked by Christopher Shays, a congressman out of Connecticut, which was the second state to pass the laws, mandating care. And we briefed the chief legal beagles, the chief, all the head lawyers for the United States House of Representatives, House Oversight Committee years ago. So members of Congress are thoroughly aware, the records and documents are up there, and there's no action because there's no accountability. What's very clear is in two administrations, now through two administrations and actually three, they've just totally ignored the requirements, and anybody speaks out, they just issue retaliation. But I think if anybody looks at our country today, anybody that speaks out from inside and tells the truth instantaneously becomes persona non grata. That's legendary now within both the Clinton and Bush administrations.
Okay. Do you know if any, when you said did you say that you guys did go into a hearing with the in front of Congress or no?
Oh, absolutely. Denise Nichols and I have briefed most of the House, members of the House, and most members of the Senate.
I mean, like it was a hearing or it was just one-on-one?
One-on-one. Door-to-door.
I'm sorry?
One-on-one, door-to-door in their offices.
Oh, I see. But actually, that's what I was getting at. So the Congress or the Senate never held any official hearings on the subject.
Well, yes, they have. Different ones have had it. Back in Veterans Day of 2000, just days after George Bush, Jr. was elected as president, I was specifically invited to speak at the Veterans Day breakfast, the keynote speak for Veterans Day of 2000, and I was ushered into the U.S. Senate. And I spoke for 25 minutes on all of this stuff. Gulf War illness, what happened, depleted uranium, my specific tasking from the Bush, Bush staff and administration at that time, the people that worked with getting them elected was very, obviously from him, was very specifically to identify the problems and identify our national obligations for the veterans of our nation.
But that was not an official hearing, though, was it?
No.
So,
but it's we're way beyond that.
So what
official hearings are forget that, okay? They're irrelevant.
What, the hearings?
Yeah, they're irrelevant.
Why?
I mean, well, nothing really happens from them.
Okay.
I mean, everybody's been briefed, and it's more important the fact that everybody's read all the documents. Everybody's been briefed one-on-one.
Okay.
That's where it's at. I mean, a hearing is irrelevant. Nothing happens from them.
Okay, but never what about these committees? Has it ever came in front of a committee, this subject?
Oh, absolutely, a lot. Sure, absolutely. All this stuff has, many, many times.
And anything happened?
No, nothing.
Nothing happened?
Nothing happens. I mean, you have to understand. We have to go back to the day one. Prior to Gulf War I, the United States Army, United States military, and other organizations deliberately and willfully provided Iraq with the chemical and biological munitions to use against Iran, against the Iraqi Kurds, and the other ones. And we wanted to find out what happened, and we did. Then Gulf War I started, and we destroyed them in place, and they were used deliberately on us, resulting in over way over 300, over 250, 300,000 casualties from Gulf War I alone now.
Okay.
And way over 400,000 combined.
Doug, I want you to stay with me. We only have a few seconds left in this segment. We will be back in about 5 minutes as we are completely out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, we will take your phone calls in the second hour. We will be back here in 5 minutes.